Well, good afternoon, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit down. It's 2 o'clock. Now it's our session, and the afternoon keynote session. Okay, my name is Haibin. I'm a professor of Nipson University of Canada. It's my pleasure and honor to be the chair for this keynote session. I would like to introduce you the Honorable Professor Dr. S. Joe Chin here. Okay, Professor S. Joe Chin is currently the president and Wiki Call Chair Professor of Data Science of Ling Nan University in Hong Kong. In his prior career, he worked as the chair professor and the inaugural Dean of the School of Data Science at City University of Hong Kong. The floor professor at the Viterbi School of Engineering of the University of Southern California, professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and principal engineer at Emerson Process Management. Professor Chin is a member of the European Academy of Science and Arts, a fellow of the Hong Kong Academy of Engineering Sciences, fellow of the U.S. National Academy of Inventors, and the International Federation of Automatic Control, IFAC, and the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, AIC, and the IEEE. He's a recipient of the 2022 CAST Computing in Chemical Engineering Award by the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, and the 2022 IEEE CSS, that's Control Systems Society, Transition to Practice Award, the U.S. National Science Foundation Career Award, and the 2011 Northrop Grumman Best Teaching Award at Viterbi School of Engineering, and the IFAC Best Paper Prize for Model Predictive Control paper published in Control Engineering Practice. Professor Chin has published over 470 international journal papers, book chapters, conference papers, and etc. He's the inventor of 12 US patents. He received over 39,000 Google Scholar citations with an H index of 87. Now let's welcome Professor Chin to give the notes, give the speech.
Is this your phone? You want to take your phone? Maybe someone can start the clock so it'll work for me. Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you, Haibin, for the introduction. And also, I want to thank the conference organizers for the invitation for me to give this keynote talk. I think my area has been in between, many different application areas. My original background is actually automatic control, and then I really like data for the last at least 35 years or so. My PhD work was on neural networks. So I think it's very hard for me to define who I am in terms of my research areas, but certainly systems is a major component of everything I do. So the topic today I would like to introduce is really on multidimensional time series data from engineering systems. And how do we extract interpretable and useful information with not huge, large models, but with minimal size models. Maybe this parsimonious requirement was reflected in this work. Okay, and I have my co-author of this paper, Dr. and Professor Yanfang Mo, who is also assistant professor at Lingnan University now. So she did a lot of work when she was a postdoc working with me. A few slides about Lingnan University in Hong Kong. You may have not heard about Lingnan University maybe until recently when Professor Sam Kwong joined Lingnan University from City University. So this university has been actually had a long history. From 1888, started called Christian College in China. Actually, that was the original name, and it was established by the American Presbyterian missionaries. Since then, it had operated in Guangzhou for about 64 years. I think around 1950 or so, there was a change of government, and then this university was reorganized into 4 or 5 other universities in Guangzhou. Around 1967, the alumni in Hong Kong decided to re-establish it in Hong Kong. It was a private university, and it was still remained private until 1991. From 91, Lingnan University started to receive grants from the government of Hong Kong. So that's the sort of a part of the history. And then around 99, it renamed to Lingnan University and also gained the status of a university in Hong Kong from then. In the last year or so, we have refocused Lingnan University to be a comprehensive university in arts and sciences in the digital era. Okay, so that's a small introduction. And then where we are is actually we are in Hong Kong, in the northwest part of Hong Kong, in the New Territory. It's actually, you can see from this part of the map, it's very, very close to Shenzhen. It's about 15 minutes drive north through the bridge. By the bridge, you can get to Shenzhen in 15 minutes. Some of our colleagues actually live in Shenzhen and then work at Lingnan, so that's how close it is. And then downward, you can go to the airport of Hong Kong, the international airport, in about 25 minutes through the tunnel. The tunnel is also a new tunnel there, okay. On the Google map, it actually shows as 21 minutes. So that's when it's a good part of the day, okay. But anyway, we started to use this campus since 1995, and that was built by the government. Okay, so for the talk today, I will be a little bit technical, all right? So since I'm working on more parsimonious modeling of high-dimensional time series data, we are doing things that's a little bit different from the large language model or the deep learning models. We can understand what we do. We can interpret what we do. So that's actually why it's important to work on these things for interpretability and predictions and so on. So I would really go back to the industrial automation versus AI, and then reduced dimensional dynamic data. We have learned dimension reduction. We learned dynamic modeling, but how do you do both together? Okay, so reduce down to the really the independent dimensions of dynamics. That's the topic of today, okay? So this framework of probabilistic reduced dimensional modeling is my focus. And also I will provide the foundations for doing this. Okay, so that's the main part. And then I'll give a few applications. Basically, these are real industrial domain applications, and then I will conclude. So that's the talk today, okay? So I have picked up some social media messages. This one was picked up in the Chinese Weibo on February last year. So this is just a couple of months after ChatGPT was released. So this one thing one comment is very nice. I like it. I still like it now. So basically, he showed this disappointment of AI. Why? Because he thought AI would help us cooking, do cleaning, and even do some other dirty work. But actually, it does not do any of those. AI, just chatting, drawing, writing, composing, and playing games. Okay, so that's what AI is good at. So I think this shows the sort of the two sides of this technology now. It is revolutionizing the cognitive system, okay, anything that interacts with human directly, but it does not yet deal well with the physical world, and I will explain why, okay? When we do industrial automation or using AI for industrial systems or engineering systems, we have to deal with real world problems. So one good side on the cognitive side, let's say, what about drawing? Also, I used the ChatGPT-4 to generate some pictures for Lingnan graduates. This was done in September last year. I have to share with you that Lingnan University has made ChatGPT and later versions of GPT available freely to everyone on campus. So I was able to access it. We make really the campus now digitalized. So I asked GPT-4 to generate a Lingnan graduate for different years. A little background, Lingnan University actually graduated the first female bachelor student in China, okay, in the entire China. So that was in 1921. So my question was, in 1921, what's the graduate from Lingnan look like, a female graduate, okay? So basically, I got a photo generated, that's on the left, all right? So if you, now it's generating black and white, okay, 1921. And also, if you see the background building, it's like somewhat like a campus building in the Lingnan style, okay? So it has really captured some important characters. But of course, this is not the real person who graduated. It's generated, okay? And then I asked it about a graduate from Lingnan in 1980. So you get this one on the right. So that also starts to see the color photos, color photographers, right, around 1980. So that's in color. Still shows a little bit of age or vintaged, appearance. So that's how good AI is in generating this. This was last September. So I asked it, September last year. I asked it to generate graduate from Lingnan in 2023. And this is, I got two, okay. I got two photos. One is Asian student, of course, Hong Kong, this is typical. But the other one caught me by surprise. It's an African look student that's graduated from Lingnan. So I had to think for a few seconds. Actually, it makes sense because we have quite a few students from Africa, and also graduate students and also faculty members who are from Africa. So, and these students happen to be more active than the average. Okay, the other students, they often go up to stage and either singing or dancing or being an MC. So they got captured by the generative AI. So that's the cognitive side. The cognitive side, okay, AI is very good. Now, what AI is not so good so far is actually when we have to deal with the physical and real-world problems like engineering systems. So I basically use this flying airplane as an example to show that for any engineering systems, we know some of it, okay? That's like in the Chinese tradition of philosophy, that's a black and white fish. Well, the white part could be representing the known part, okay? So we know physics, we know something, but we don't know everything about a physical system. Like flying an airplane, we know everything about the airplane we built, but when we fly it, we might run into problems. We could have accidents. That's because we have the ambience, the surroundings that the airplane flies through, that we don't know everything, okay? We have to get real-time data, gather real-time data, and then if you have the right model, or if you have the experienced pilot who could interpret the data, and then you might be able to go through everything you fly through. Otherwise, bad accident could happen, okay? So this is really showing that while we know part of the engineering system, we have to use real-time data to know the part that we don't know, okay? And the learning process is really to make the dark part more white, and then you could make decisions that's more certain, okay? They'll generate the results that you want. So that's about really the topic of today. So we are dealing with engineering systems that has to use data to help us know what's going on exactly, okay? And the topic today also, we have to use multiple high-dimensional measurement, okay? And this is one of the application, say from medical EEG. We measure multiple locations of the skull, and that's how we try to understand the brain functions, okay? And this is what you get. You may get more than 20 channels of EEG signals, but they all represent or react to a few things only. There are a few activities that happens in the brain. You try to understand what are those few things that's happening, okay? So it is high-dimensional data, but not necessarily high-dimensional dynamics, okay? And for economics, actually, there are a lot of economic indices, over 100 or more. But we only have a few drivers there in the market, okay? And this is like the monthly unemployment rate in the 50 states of the United States, okay? You know, it's all responding to some major economics, but then you have differences from state to state, but there's common things, common dynamics we want to figure out, okay? For industrial automation systems, control systems, this is, again, a little history we know from the steam engines governor up to PID control, and then to distributed control systems, and more recently the model predictive control systems. We basically have migrated from very few control loops to many control or multiple interacting control loops. And now we're thinking about AI for industrial intelligence. And that's really the path forward, okay? And what you see from this migration of technologies is that there is a data intensity increase, sensor richness increase, automation level increase, and also intelligence level increase, okay? So basically we have more and more data we have to interpret and make decision upon. Another aspect is the autonomous system. I think from this morning's talk by Said, you understand in this autonomous system, there are many redundancy in the sensors. You have to cover more than you need, okay, in order to avoid something failing or some blind corner. So that's, you really want the reliability. However, you get more dimensions than the system dynamics, okay? It's not easy to make decisions on really over doubling, tripling dimensions. You want to figure out what's the true dimension of the dynamics. So that's what we're doing today. Okay, we want to do in rich sensor environment, how do we pick the independent dynamic dimensions and model it? Chemical processes is another one. And this one actually has been running since Industry 3.0. Okay, it's not recent. So we have many interactive energy and material loops, physical loops, and also control loops. But we're trying to make a product here to satisfy some purity requirement. We got raw material from upstream reaction. So that's the process. If you don't do it in the right way, you have to recycle it. Okay, do it again. So that's but we've got many measurements I can show you. These are some of the measurements from the 3 columns. And you can see the top right corner measurements are very highly correlated. Okay. They are dynamic, but they move in a similar way. So I would call them co-moving dynamics or co-dynamic factors. Okay, so that's what we're interested in. High-dimensional data, what are the co-dynamic factors? Now, back to this framework of deep learning, we have to relate to this, although our model philosophy is to find the simplest representation, not just as complex as you want, okay? So really, machine learning, deep learning is the ability to extract simple dimensions that human can interpret. You can include a transformer in this framework, similar. You got encoder, decoder, and so on. You try to learn something that you can interpret from it, okay? So basically, we want to make something that can be interpreted or visualized, and also use it to for diagnosis and troubleshooting, okay? And that's the framework. Now, back to high-dimensional time series, okay? We measure, let's say, some dimensions of data. Each of them appear dynamic, okay? But they are not necessarily independently dynamic. And they might be driven even just by one dynamic factor, and some others that are not so dynamic, okay? So that's the generating process. The data generating process, because there's one or a few dynamic factors that's reflected in many measurements that look dynamic. Okay, so our purpose, our task is to do the reverse. Okay, modeling is always an inverse problem. So we try to get the independent dynamic factors from these highly co-dynamic measurements. All right. So how do we get back to the latent dynamic variables? And that's the task. Now, first I have to define what is a dynamic correlation or serial correlation. This is a standard. So basically for a p-dimensional measurement, all right, if you find this vector had some correlation to its past, any past moment, that's time serially dependent or time serially correlated, p-dimensional vector. However, you could have a partial correlation, okay? So this is what's on the right, in that even though the vector looks serially correlated, there could be some projection or combination of these variables in the vector that all appear not dynamic or not serially correlated. For example, I have 2 measurements. One is x, the other is epsilon minus x. And these 2, you add them together, it'll be just epsilon. It'll be just white noise, okay? So therefore, you could have each one of them being dynamic, but some combinations are not dynamic. So that's the representation. Okay, for any y vector, if it's serially dynamic, it could be combined to get you some non-dynamic combinations, and that would be white noise factors, okay? On the other hand, if you look at its orthogonal part, it could be more dynamic than any of the individual variable in it. So that's the twist of multidimensional vector when we talk about serial correlations. So now I define what is a probabilistic reduced dimensional model. Basically, here is the definition. It's very, very clear. So we get high dimensional measurement, but we think the dynamics come from a smaller dimension, V vector. And there's another complement part that's generated from white noise, okay? So basically, V and epsilon bar add up together to the full dimension. Part of that is not dynamic, part of that is dynamic. And we do have some representation of the dynamic part. This is the simplest way we do vector AR, okay? You can use other dynamic representations of the V vector, the latent vector, okay? So the key message is that P needs to be a tall matrix. It has fewer columns than the rows, okay? And then the complement is a P bar, which allow the non-dynamic noise to go through, okay? So this expression is our model, which would be different from any traditional multi-series, multi-time series modeling, okay? And then you can make it into product of two matrices or vectors there. And another thing I have to mention that we do not require the noise from the static part and noise from dynamic part to be uncorrelated. So this sigma, the covariance between epsilon and epsilon bar could be non-zero. That's in general, okay? I'll show you with another twist in a moment. By the way, with a dynamic part, we could always predict it, okay? So with for a VAR model, this is our prediction we had. And with V hat, we could make it so that this V is V hat plus the innovation epsilon, and therefore we can substitute this V by V hat and epsilon, and therefore we convert the model into P times a predictor, and this predictor has a lower dimension, okay? And then the E part is not predictable. E part is both the static innovation and the dynamic innovation. So this is our reduced dimensional predictor model. I'll summarize it on this slide, okay? So I would say this is the key message of this talk. Nearly all the modeling work we do in dynamic systems or in time series is what's on the right-hand side. That is, the predictor dimension y hat is the same as the measurement dimension. Now, in our case, V hat is smaller than the measurement dimension. We have to figure out what is P, okay, from the data, as well as the predictor V hat. Okay, so that's the significant change. It looks very simple difference, but we have to figure out the P matrix that's compressing into a latent dimension, and then figure out the latent reduced dimensional predictor. And that's the framework we're talking about, okay? Now, the predictor we had, of course, is based on its past measurement, its past values of V, okay? It have to be causal, so it's coming from the past. So that's the framework. And I would say there has not been any work that addresses reduced dimensional prediction, okay? This is the work we're showing now. Okay, a little bit of mathematics, and then it becomes easier. Interestingly, this framework has not been studied well, and you look at this representation of the measurement is partly dynamic, partly static with this PP bar partition, and the two add together needs to be invertible. That's not hard to require, okay? And then for any invertible matrix, you have an inverse. I just represent the inverse as R and R bar transpose, okay? So when we do this, we come up with some interesting oblique projections. Let's say P and R forms an oblique projection, and that's just something we need it, okay? It's general. It's not like we have no restriction. We just require P and P bar to be invertible, okay? Okay. And now with that, with this R and R bar as inverse of P and P bar, we can explicitly represent the V latent variable, latent vector, and also the epsilon bar as combinations of the data, combinations. Or this is actually, in neural networks, is the encoder. You encode the original data to latent vectors, but this particular V, I want it to be dynamic. I want it to be as predictable as possible. So it's most predictable based on its past. Okay. So does that help by combining measurements? Do you get more predictable variables by combining some measurements? This is one example that's kind of against our intuition. Okay. I have a simple situation where two measurements. Okay. One is correlated, that's Y1, but we have here exactly Y1 is a dynamic variable that's predictable. Y2 is white noise. Okay, Y2 is white noise. Now the question is, by combining a measurement with another white noise, do you get something that's more predictable than the predictable variable, or not? Is the white noise part useful or helpful or not? Okay. So one maybe realistic example is you have two stocks. One is not predictable. The other one is predictable. Now, by adding the two with some weighted coefficients, do you get something more predictable, or that's not possible? So that's the message. Okay. The message is, if the driving innovation between the two measurements are correlated with non-zero correlation, then you can have one combination that's V prime that will have a variance. It's a white noise. It's innovation variance. This part, okay, to be less than 1, or basically you have something more predictable than any one of the original variables. Okay. So basically, you don't want to throw away the white noise measurement. It could be useful in modeling the predictable part of the system. Okay. So that's something really. In most practice, you would throw away something that's not predictable, but here you do not want to do it. Okay. So anyway, combining variables that appear to be white noise could make you something more predictable. Okay. Okay, that's one surprise. Another thing is, how do we handle this correlated innovations from the static part and the dynamic part? Okay. It's very interesting that when we had that matrix, R transpose P to be a mutual inverse, right? R and P to be mutual inverse. You actually can add a free matrix N in the middle. You could add some part of N to the P bar part and add it to the R bar part. You still have a pair of mutual inverse matrix. So you get an infinite number of realizations, okay? For any N could be 0, then it's trivial. But if N is non-zero, no matter what it is, you still have this identity hold. This is something also surprising. So what it means is that, say if you want to extract the dynamic part with the P matrix, okay, then the innovation could also be represented arbitrarily with another innovation. This E has really this static part. It could be somewhat arbitrary, but it has to follow this form, okay, with the free matrix in terms of the N matrix. Okay, it's kind of an infinite combination, but not arbitrarily free. Okay, so now what is about epsilon bar? Epsilon bar would be the innovation of the dynamic part, and that's this part. It's still an innovation because it's unpredictable. Okay, so what the summary of this theorem is that for any data generating process with a correlated or whatever the noise of the static and dynamic part, you have infinite number of equivalent realizations because there's n, the free matrix n here. Okay, it's not unique. Now, what do you do if it's not unique? This is what we do, okay. Interesting further, this realized epsilon bar has a minimum covariance, which means this is the minimum covariance. Anything else would be bigger than that, okay? And then only if you have this n equal to this form, the minimum covariance is realized. When this minimum covariance of the innovation is realized, you have optimal prediction, okay? So you have the best prediction possible because the noise part has the smallest covariance. So this is what we do, okay? And when this is realized, you make epsilon bar and epsilon prime to be uncorrelated. Even though the original data generating process has correlated noise terms, you can realize uncorrelated model to be equivalent to the data, okay? So it's a little bit convoluted, but I will show you this process. This is the thought process, and it's also thorough analysis. There was a previous work that they never had this bridge built, okay? So basically, our data generating process can have the noise source to be correlated, mutually correlated, and we see for anything you have an infinite number of representation of the same data coming from the data generating process, okay? Now, there's one unique realization that will make the epsilon bar to be uncorrelated to epsilon prime, okay? And that realization has minimal covariance when n is taking this form, okay? There's one unique optimal realization, and that one is what we're looking for, okay? When that happens, your epsilon bar would be uncorrelated with the epsilon prime. Even though the data generating process has correlated noise source, you can have a unique realization that make the noise source to be uncorrelated, okay? So that's the one we're looking for. Therefore, we could assume the dynamic noise and the static noise are uncorrelated, and we drop the prime notation, okay, for the rest of the talk. Okay, so that's about theory. And why we want to do this? Certainly, we want to know what we're doing, okay? And when this happens, now we drop this epsilon prime to make it epsilon, okay? If these two are uncorrelated, then the covariance will have two terms only, okay, like this. And its inverse, sigma inverse, innovation inverse, will also have only two terms. Interesting, you just invert each part, okay? And this is very, very useful for our maximum likelihood formulation. For maximum likelihood, we form general likelihood. Now it's breaking down into the static part and also the dynamic V part, okay? So if you want to have the optimal solution, you just minimize each part of that separately, okay? So that's the machinery that helps us. Okay, I will just show you there are some prior work in mostly the statistics, time series literature, and so on. They did dynamic factor models and others. What we're doing now is latent dynamic modeling. And we have two versions before this work. One is a DICCA, it's an inner dynamic model. I will show you later. The other one is what we call LaVar. Okay, DICCA will model each latent variable at a time, one at a time. So therefore, there's no interaction between the latent variables. And then LaVar is like the PredVar that models all the latent variables simultaneously with interaction. And they each will have some specific uses, okay? So here's the work, the way to do it. Okay, you get the data sequence, combine them or encode them into V, and DICCA will, and both will minimize the difference between the prediction and the extracted latent vector, and latent vector comes from combining the original data, okay? Now, DiCCA will just do each of this one separately and then build the latent dynamics, okay? But then LaVar and Padua will do them simultaneously. Okay, here's this algorithm. We do have this in that paper, but I want to show you a few things. One is data normalization is needed to help everything. Then we do use what's called instrumental variable approach to do this modeling because we don't know either part of this, okay? In any regression, you would know one part. Now, in this dynamic modeling, we don't know either P or the V hat. So instrumental variables are very useful here. A few iterations can give you the best refinement, and this is better than the one-shot method, but anyway, that's the simple summary. So I want to move on. Here, some more things to understand this method. Okay, we have an original sequence of data. We do encoding, or we call it weighting. This is simple linear encoder. And then we do the dynamic modeling in the latent part, not anything else, okay? We make the V to be most predictable, and then we do the decoding part. Again, linear decoder, if you want to use the neural network terminology, okay? All right, so now we can do some comparison. Comparison, we have PCA, simple linear encoder, decoder, autoencoder. LaVar is everything together, and Padua is this probabilistic maximum likelihood formulation. The last two are like dynamic factors. The first two only focus on static factors with maximum covariance, let's say, like PCA. Okay, so that's the comparison we'll do. What I do here is I will use this the Lorentz attractor with 3 differential equations, and this one can give you very highly dynamic data, but I make them into only 3 dimensions. I add 3 more dimensions of noise, uncorrelated noise, mix them to give us 6 sensors data, okay? And the 6 sensors are mixed by these 2 matrices, okay, P and P bar. So now what we got data is like this. The Lorentz attractor was very smooth, but here we got very noisy measurements. The question is, can we recover the smooth signal, okay? Can we filter out the noise? If you do PCA, this is what we get. The first 3 principal components is very noisy. Only the second one has a little bit of dynamics, okay? That's because PCA cares less about dynamics than the covariance, all right? Now, if you do our LaVar model, you get the 3 components that's very clean and smooth. That's the Lorentz dynamics. View it from another angle in the data space. I can only show you 3 dimensions, even though it's 6 dimension, okay? Because we can only visualize 3 dimensions. You see this, the red dots are the data with noise. That's what we get. What's hidden there is the blue part. That's the butterfly dynamics, okay? So now if you do PCA, PCA gives you very similar to the noise, noisy data, no patterns, okay? If you do autoencoder, okay, like with neural networks, you get similar things, okay, just noise. Because autoencoder also try to mimic the variance maximization or minimizing the residuals, the decoder part, okay? If you do our dynamic latent modeling, you recover this from the red dots, you get this very nice signal part, okay? So that's how good it is. Let's look at some real data. Real data don't necessarily follow our assumption, but we can make this modeling work useful. This is reduced dimensional predictor modeling, okay? Again, for this dot chemical process data, I will just focus on 4 months of data from January to end of April, okay? And the data, after combining and we do a number of dynamic latent variables. This is the prediction similarity, or the R-square. You'll see as we increase the dimension of the latent variables up to 5 or 6, we get the maximum similarity between the predicted latent variables and the extracted latent variables. So you would say that 5 or 6 is good enough, okay? Even though the dimension is 33, we have 33 time series. We can model the dynamics with 5 latent variables. There's compression, there's also no more left, okay? If you add more, it's less predictable. That's what it is. And this is for each latent variable, the autocorrelation. You can see the autocorrelation as you increase the lag, it still remains to be autocorrelated in the DLV, but the residual, which is the modeled innovations, and they are not correlated after you add 1 lag, okay? So that shows the effectiveness of the dynamic modeling. How do you interpret it? These are the top latent variables extracted, and give you part of the data to be compared with. So you could see DLV1 really is very much similar to this group of variables, okay? And there's a lot of variables, even this part is similar to that DLV1. And that means a lot of variables are encoded in DLV1, okay? This is the P matrix. If you get the 5 columns of P, this is column 1 up to column 5. And represented with the blue part is a positive coefficient, the red part is negative coefficient, okay? So I save space by doing this. You can see the variables are loaded in different ways, but then the first latent variable interpret most of the variables, okay? Really, you get something close to 1 loading, or this is really this interpretability by this latent variable 1. So, and then the others, after the first, and the other latent variables don't have really much information there to be loaded to other DLVs. And then the 5th one, you can see it represent the second variable, okay? That's the tail flow of the primary column. If you have a process knowledge, you can interpret this very, very nicely, okay? Another application, and this one is really the one that we made industry people really interested. This is a chemical plant at Eastman Chemical in the US, okay? Many chemical plants look like this. They have a lot of energy and material integration because you don't want to waste anything. You want to recover from the waste energy and waste material. So there is a forward path. You go from feed material to product. And also, if you don't get this, the product to be good quality, you recycle it. Okay, you come back to the original. So when you do this, it's nice, but there's a little bit non-ideal things. You can have oscillations all over the place. And when you have that, and the operators think this is normal. Okay, they don't think there's something to be fixed, or they don't know where the problem is to fix anything. Okay, until they have to shut down the entire plant after some operations. So this is really in the domain of predictive, if you want to call it predictive maintenance, this is one way, okay? So now we want to figure out from this oscillated time series data, where does it come from, okay? So here's the process. So we feed the original oscillatory data to the analyzer, and then we get these latent variables, okay? This is, by the way, 48 hours of data, 2 days worth of data, all right? Now you can see DLV1 has that part, oscillatory. However, the period of oscillation is 1 day, okay? And also you look at the weight, it's related to one variable that's exposed to the atmosphere. It's a cooling tower, okay? So therefore, this is really related to the ambient temperature. There's nothing we can do about that. But the other two DLVs have this roughly 2 hours oscillation, okay? This is something we really want to know, why it has 2-hour oscillations. And of course, there are more oscillations with a finer frequency there, okay? So I'm going to show you the load, or this, what do you call decoder or load analysis of these two frequency, two DLVs that oscillate at 2 hours. You get the loadings here and then sort by this composite loading of the two DLVs. Red represent one and then blue represent the other DLV. So very clearly you see the top 5 here focus on a few variables, okay? Again, level control, flow control, temperature control. Where are they in the process? I'll show you. Here is the 5 variable, okay? Level control and level valve, that's covered there, okay? And then it goes down to the downstream column with temperature and other things. That's the group of variables that play a major role for this oscillation. And then that's how it is affecting, coming from the upper part of the reactor decanter and then down to the column. And there's also another recycle loop coming back, okay? So this whole loop gives us a 2-hour oscillation. The matter of the fact is we showed this result to the engineers of the plant. They said, yes, that's the problem. The problem comes from the valve here. And when they fix the valve, let me show you what happens, okay? This is the process, get the data to get this interesting DLVs, analyze the contributions or the weights, and then you fix the valve, and this is what you get. Before you fix the valve, a level control valve, you have oscillations in this variable. This is the throughput variable. That's how much raw material you can put into the process, okay? Around 8, no matter what the unit it is, it's around 8, okay? And it's oscillatory, all right, has a big range. After you fix it, you get to about 9.2, and the major oscillations disappear. So what does this mean? You can operate the same plant with 15% more material to process. You can process 15% more material with the same process, okay? If you think about a highway, you can put through 15% more cars in the rush hour. That's more efficient, right? So this is really the efficiency improvement by 15%, okay? Anyway, that's the message. With interpretable, predictable latent variables, we can do a lot of things. These are just 2 examples I'm showing you. Finally, I want to conclude, okay? Really, we're looking at codynamic data with high dimensions. Why we have codynamics? Because we have a lot of measurements maybe than the dynamics of the system, especially for autonomous systems, okay? We are sort of proposing a general reduced dimensional predictor framework versus full dimensional predictors in the past, okay? For the last 50 years or so, we've always been dealing with the 4-dimensional predictors, okay? And then we have a probabilistic framework that's basically maximum likelihood. And then the extracted DLVs will have the maximum prediction power, and prediction error is minimized, okay? So the solution requires an oblique projection, and also it'll decorrelate the noise and this from the dynamic and the static part, all right? Finally, I would like to say that there are many other applications that could be using this reduced dimensional predictor, and like monitoring, maintenance, troubleshooting, and so on. And other informatics like econometrics, medical applications, and so on could be potential areas. I would say that high dimensional time series data is almost ubiquitous in all engineering systems. I would like to really see if we could collaborate or work together to make something more interesting. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now we have time for questions. And if you have any question, go to the microphone and tell others where you are, what's your name, and what's your question. Is head burning? Right? Yeah. Any question? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you for very interesting talk. So my question is here. I think is your framework is very useful for reduce the dimension of time series data. So my question is like, do you have, for example, what's the potential ratio, for example, how if we have very high dimension system and what's the limit, for example, minimum dimension we can do compare that dimension of the data.
Okay, thank you. And that question relates to how do you determine the number of dynamic components, right?
Okay.
It's related to that. So really it depends on the dynamic content of the measurement. In the extreme case, none of the measurements are dynamic, so you need zero. You would have zero component in the dynamic part. Yeah. But in some cases, in the other extreme, of course, then it's back to the traditional modeling. Every dimension is dynamic and independent. Yeah. Okay, so therefore, how many is appropriate? You could do a few things. One is, let's say, you want to achieve 90% predictability. Let's say you select a component so that 90% of the overall variance will be captured, and then you are happy with that. That's one way of determining the number of dynamic component. Another way, of course, is to do cross-validation, right? So when you pick too many, then you will get into the non-predictable part in the model, so you cut it there, okay? So again, there could be more theoretical studies on this topic, but these are two simple sort of practical approaches. Yeah.
Okay, so that is if I understand that correctly, so this is very depend on the
content of the
and
data.
Also the accuracy, predicting accuracy, and the correlation strength, right?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other? Okay, please.
Hello, President Chen. Ieee from University of Electronic Science and Technology of China, just next door to you, not from Chengdu.
Okay.
Very interesting talk. What I'm interested in most is the case where system is not very much decoupled. When you do prediction, what is the convergence rate in a way? Do you have a algorithmic complexity number? Let's say if you do it online in real time, how much time roughly would you need? Is that in n times log n or n squared and so on?
Yeah, that's interesting. In terms of computational complexity, we're doing just a SVD and also least squares. That's one iteration. You have least squares of some dimensions and then SVD. Okay. Pretty much that's one iteration or one instrumental variable iteration. And if you want to refine it, you add a few more iterations until you don't see the improvement. Right now, we are not required to do sort of infinite iteration until you have no improvement, but we use the instrumental variable approach to interpret our method. Again, because both P and the predictor are not known. And this is very, very strange, right? For any regression problems, you would know one part of it. But for our model, both parts are not known. Therefore, we resort to instrumental variable approach. Find something that's very close to the predictor we had, not close to the noise, and that's the instrumental variable we're using. We can discuss the detail later. But then the computational complexity, I would say, is much faster than some of the neural networks or so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, in your practical applications, How high was the dimensionality have you ever encountered?
Yeah, yeah. We looked at like around 50. We have not.
Okay.
Let me try to think.
Oh, that's a great number.
Yeah, yeah.
But now my real question really is that in that kind of case, like 50, how decoupled do you encounter, or can you decouple it in a way? I mean, if they cannot be decoupled, can you reduce the dimensionality easily?
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, this is really maybe someone who study information theory, they can understand it better. Sure. So we could reduce 50 into 1.
All right.
Okay, so we're not interested in getting all the content out.
Sure.
I want to find one. If I have one dimension, how much I can get? What's the most predictable component I can get? So then you cannot get anything better than that. Okay. Yeah, yeah. So that's by itself is useful. It's not exhausting everything, but it's giving the most predictable component. And this could be used for stock mutual fund. Let's say you form a mutual fund by a basket of stocks. You just want to combine into one index that gives you the weights. That's the percentage allocation of your money, and by that allocation you get something that's most predictable. So therefore you can have very different uses if you just want to have one component. On the other hand, if you want something that's predicting everything, okay, but you don't need the full dimension, and that's a different kind of application, okay. Really, I see either you want to do interpretation or diagnosis or maximum power prediction using as many components as needed, but no more, okay, but no more than what you need. This is different from the full dimensional predictor approach.
Good luck.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And our time is used up, so we have to proceed to the next session. Thank you. Let's thank Professor Chen again.
Okay, thank you.
FDMI. So do you have an FDMI? So only FDMI? HDMI, yes. I don't have it.
So would you say
Your USB is in here. So this is Can I use?
Let me just check this.
Okay, you use.
Yeah, but let me just
Try yours. Yes.
see that it's going up. It should be. Yes. Okay. Excellent.
Because I use my power.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. Try. introduce the USB to your computer, and then you actually. So we wait a little bit. In 5 minutes, we will make it. Okay. So we should start with, so we, after the announcement from me, we'll start with you. Okay, so okay, actually we are not going to go back here. Then I will introduce Julie for the second talk. Okay. After that, then we have discussion. Then we all see. Yeah, discussion is here. Okay, so yes, yeah, fine. So Dimitar will this one I will put down. Okay. That'd be good. So you want to go back? It's up to you now. Or after or before that. I introduce before I introduce the speaker, Dimitar start the talk and then we move. How about that? So before I will yeah, you stay here. I guess we can't see though. Yeah. After at the beginning I will introduce the two speakers. Just the name. And then I start with after that and Dimitar. Yeah, because we cannot see the slide. So after Dimitar's talk, then I'll get you back on the stage for your presentation. No, they will reset the clock. They will reset the clock. 30 minutes. Yes, 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Good. Well, if you could finish, before. Okay? It's up to you. It's no worry. No worry. Maybe. Okay, I think people is taking a short break, so I think I will start in 2 minutes. Hopefully, people are leaving, and I hope you could stay a bit or yeah. Okay. Again, yes. Let's get started on the Ieee SMC founders meetings. In fact, this forum has been set up a few years ago. The main idea, I think, the forum was initiated by by Dimitar Filev, and the main idea is to enable our senior officers and with the society to really come here to share with us some of their vision on the topics which are related to IEEE system and cybernetics, as well as its future. So today, the topic of the IEEE SMC Founders Forum 2024 is about navigating the AI era. So AI nowadays is getting very hot and popular. So interestingly, today we will talk about the applications and the implication of artificial intelligence. So today we are very happy to have our senior past president, very senior, Dimitar Filev. So and also we have our past VP on many other things. Conference, one thing I remember that we met quite many years ago, Julie Adams. Okay, so Dr. Dimitar is the senior Henry for technical fellow in control and AI at Ford Motor Company before he retired. Currently, he is a fellow of the Hangla Institute of Advanced Study, Texas A&M University. So his research is in computational intelligence, AI, and intelligent control, as well as their applications to autonomous driving, vehicle system, and automotive engineering. He holds 140 granted US patents and more than 100 foreign patents, and has over 200 publications with 21,000 citations and H-index of 63. He has been awarded 6 times the Henry Ford Technology Award. He is also the recipient of IEEE SMCS 2008 Robert Winner Award, the 2015 IEEE Computational Intelligence Pioneer Award, and the 2023 John Wall Outstanding Career Award. So Dr. Filev is a member of NAE, National Academy of Engineering, US, and a Life Fellow of the IEEE. He was the president of the society in 2016 and 17. So he got his PhD in Ieee from the Czech Technical University Prague in 1979. So let's welcome Dr. Dimitar Filev. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I would like to thank Sam for the nice introduction and for the setting up this panel. We lost the... Yeah. Yeah, you want me to... Let me see. I have zip drive. No, okay.
Or you can use my USB. You want to use my... Dimitar, I have your USB. I have a USB here. But what do you want? You can use my USB. Yes, USB here.
Sorry about that. Is it from yours? Okay. Okay. Sorry for the confusion and sorry for the delay. I would like to thank Sam for the nice introduction and for organizing this panel. Actually, this was his idea for this to select the topic. And I think that we all agree that the topic is really very good and very good fit to this conference, because all of us are very much affected by AI, and without any doubt, AI will have big impact on our society. I don't feel comfortable to talk there about, in general, about the navigating in AI. I have worked for 30 years in the automotive industry, so my comments will be from the perspective mostly of automotive engineering applications of AI. When I talk about AI, deep learning, reinforcement learning, generative AI, I'll have in mind mostly applications of AI to autonomous vehicles, because I led the research on autonomous vehicles at Ford for the last 10 years, and this is until 2022. And this is the area where I can really consider the real impact of AI. And I'll try to give you my point of view about what would be the future and the path to so-called general AI. But before going to deep learning, I wanted to just to acknowledge and to remind you that what was AI about 30, 40 years ago, when we were talking mostly about meaning AI, we were talking about expert system, knowledge-based systems, fuzzy logic, neural nets, so-called now shallow neural networks, genetic algorithms, support vector machines, and so on. All these applications actually created a lot of innovations at this time, and there was a lot of excitement about this. And just wanted to mention a couple of those that have been very close to my heart. One is the misfire detector, which is anomaly detector using recurrent networks, and which takes into account the diagnostics of misfire. These are events of combustion which are not desirable, which lead to very poor performance of the vehicle, and can damage the catalytic converter permanently. And the problem of identifying and diagnosing this is very difficult, specifically for engines that are with 10 and 12 cylinders. And Ford developed this solution about the end of 90s. And it has been in all programs of Aston Martin until 2012, when Ford sold Aston Martin. And we licensed this to them, this algorithm. Computational Intelligence Society declared this as the first real automotive applications of neural networks. So this was something very real. There were a number of other applications related to diagnostics and selecting of optimal modes and so on in the vehicle using these so-called computational intelligence algorithms. In summary, these algorithms are very useful. They are simple, universal approximators. They can run a conventional hardware, and this was the reason for which they were easily integrated within the existing control and information systems in the vehicles. And I don't see any reason to continue to use this type of technology in the future for problems of this scale, because I don't think that we need deep networks for every problem. And these are typical examples of cases that can be solved elegantly with algorithms of the computational intelligence. However, the computational intelligence was not able to address issues that were created when the boom of autonomous vehicles came. This was 2004 when the DARPA Grand Challenge started, and after that was accelerated very much in around 2010. And during this autonomous boom, where everybody was trying to create vehicles that are completely autonomous, which is level 5 autonomy, where the vehicle is completely robotic vehicle and the driver has no reason to at all to interact with the vehicle. At this time, we realized that it was not possible actually to solve this with the tools of computational intelligence, and this was when the time when basically the modern AI became a very essential part of automotive industry. What is behind the autonomous vehicle? We already talked, Maria Grazia talked yesterday about that, perception and decision-making algorithms. But with this difference that we require a very strong type of safety assurance for these algorithms. The goal for level 5 vehicle is a fatality rate that is in the range of 10 to minus 9 events per 1 hour of driving. Just for comparison, the conventional vehicle has fatality rate of 10 to minus 6. So the autonomous vehicle is supposed to be 1,000 times more safe than the conventional vehicle. This is not the case, of course, now. For now, we don't have statistics about fatalities with autonomous vehicles because they have not been tested to that extent, but we have information about the accidents per 1 million miles, and the number of accidents per 1 million miles for traditional vehicle is 4.1, while for autonomous vehicle is 9.1, which means that there is a lot to be done actually in order to progress and to achieve this type of autonomy that will be fully robotic type of vehicle of level 5. And the open issues related to that, of course, are related to sensors, also to hardware, but to a big extent they are related to the algorithms of AI. And I want to give you one example. This is the reinforcement learning algorithm applied to highway driving. Highway driving is one of the most well-defined problems in autonomous vehicle design, where we have a set of state variables that are mapped to 8 discrete outputs. And the typical solution of this problem is with reinforcement learning. However, the reinforcement learning, as you know, is an algorithm that is of the type of trial and error, actually, that require actions on the object that is being controlled, which is impossible. We cannot take actions directly on the vehicle. We have to use for that simulation model. And this is where the problems with reinforcement learning applications to autonomous vehicle begin, actually, because we have to use the simulation, we have to use a simulation environment. We can never make sure that the simulation model is covering completely all possible situations. So simulation accuracy, the need to frequently update the simulation model, these are big issues actually, and another major issue is the safety, because we don't have any guarantees that the reinforcement learning algorithm will produce safe solutions. So when the reinforcement algorithm is being tested on the road, we have to put additional checks to make sure that the output of the reinforcement learning algorithm is safe when the vehicle is tested on the public road. And this is the reason for introducing safety measures like safety rules. Safety rules basically help a lot to make the algorithm reliable and to be useful on the road, and we ended up with adding a bunch of rules that are derived from the so-called responsible, sensitive, safety set of rules, meta rules. And these rules, basically, as you can see on the diagram, they work as a safety. They work as a safety filter. So the conventional double deep Q network solution, DDQN, is basically upgraded here to having two buffers. One that collects all the data that is related to safe solutions, and the other which are rejected by the rules. They are mixed and sampled again and used to relearn the model. So we found this very, very effective strategy actually for improving the performance of the conventional DDQN reinforcement learning algorithm by adding this type of filter. Other measures that can help with that are adding adversarial behaviors like this. You see that in the simulator you can add vehicles that are going directly against the and trying to perform against the vehicle that is making a turn at the moment. So it takes quite a lot of time really to make I cannot turn this video on, but anyway. So it creates quite a, yeah, Sam, it's not worth to do that. So it's really take time to make the conventional reinforcement learning algorithm, which works very well, we know from DeepMind, that works very well on games of Go and chess and so on. But to make it work on a vehicle is quite a challenge. And I'm saying that reinforcement learning in general is a very good tool and very powerful tool when it is applied directly on the object rather than a simulator, because many of the issues related to reinforcement learning come from that we have to use a simulation model, and the simulation model cannot be covering all possible situations. There are limitations, which safety limitations that require to put additional checks into the reinforcement learning algorithm. It requires blending, as I mentioned, with rules and eventually with control barrier function type of filters and so on. And I think that the main issues in summary are two. One is the fact that it needs simulation environment. And the other major issue with that is the fact that reinforcement learning basically handles all the agents around in a very passive manner. It does not take into account the negotiation aspect of the driving, something that can be handled much more efficiently by tools like multi-agent optimization and game theory, and this is where we see the future in decision-making for autonomous vehicles. A few words about generative AI. GAN networks and variational autoencoders and diffusion models and transformers have been used as tools for data augmentation, synthetic data generation, improving the simulators, and creating adversarial scenarios for years already. At Ford, we have been using that for at least 5 years, GAN networks for creating synthetic data. There is another avenue of using, very interesting avenue of using generative AI in automotive industry, specifically in autonomous vehicles. You see on this diagram, on this slide on the right side, you can see the solution on top of the solution, which is based on using of variational autoencoders. The variational autoencoder takes the data from the cameras and compresses those data into the latent space, and then the latent space is mapped to the driver section. So as a whole, this algorithm, this network basically maps the sensing input directly to the driver output. So you don't have, basically there is no perception in an explicit way, there is no decision making in an explicit way. This is so-called end-to-end type of imitation learning. The big pioneer of this approach is a small company in Cambridge in the UK. The company is called Wave. This is their main approach for several years already. There is also, in the recent couple of years, they transformed this solution into by using large language models. So the idea there, which is in the lower diagram, is basically to discretize the sensing input and obtain a vector of tokens, and essentially using the tokens as prompts to a large language model. They use Llama 3.4, and the Llama produces the output. The Llama is, of course, pre-trained, and the Llama produces the output, which is mapped to the output of to the actions of the driver. So essentially, the mapping between the sensor and the action, the driver, action set, the steering, braking, and acceleration, is done by the large language model, which, in addition to the solution of in addition to mapping the sensors to the action, to the actuators, in addition to that, it provides also explanation for the decisions that are made by it. And one more interesting application of generative AI. You have heard a lot about Tesla. It's interesting that Tesla changed their approach to autonomous vehicles in the beginning of 2023, completely. Before that, they had this solution which was separated, decoupled perception and decision making. And in 2023, they decided to use transformer as a mapping between the sensor inputs and the driver section. So they do this, everything is in one giant network, which maps the input information to the actions of the driver. Tesla has a big advantage because of this, that they have huge amount of data. They have 1 million vehicles on the road and collect 1 billion miles worth of data every month. So they use this data for training. And independently of this huge amount of data, they still have quite a few disengagements. They have miles, the number of miles between two disengagements, two events in which the driver has to take action, are 744 miles, which is still very far from the requirements to have a fatality rate that's 10 to minus 9. So my point here is to show that we'll talk a lot about the need for data and so on, but even if you have all this amount of data, still there is no complete solution of the problem. So in summary about generative models, I want to say that it is a very good tool for this type of end-to-end type solution, but it requires high quality and unbiased data, and it cannot handle the cases that are very unique, that are not included in the current set of data. So always there is some chance to have something that has not been covered in the data. And I think that this is showing us one of the major deficiencies in the current AI. Basically, the lack of use of knowledge in addition to the use of data. And this brings me to the final point of these comments. In the first versions of the AI, in the early AI, the focus was more on trying to imitate how people operate and how people think. If you remember, Lotvizade was talking many times about this, that the rules in fuzzy logic basically were created in order to imitate how people think and how people operate. During the modern during the modern AI, after deep learning became the hype, we almost forgot about that, and the slogan was data is the new oil. It seems to me that what is missing and what is needed in AI in the future is something that is, I would call, knowledge-driven AI. Adding more knowledge and more summarized information into the AI system, and I would, in considering that, including understanding human cognition, capability for real-time learning and summarization, capability for adaptation, and creating knowledge from data. I believe that this is a perfect opportunity for this society, because the society covers almost all these areas. So if my prediction is correct, I believe that this might be a great opportunity for the members of this society and the people who work in this area to contribute and to help to make the transition to the general artificial intelligence. So thank you. These are my comments, and I'll now turn to Julie.
No, I still use this computer. Dimitar, I need the password. Oh, sorry. No need.
Oh, you're using your? You want to?
How about this? You want to do this, right? There you go.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dimitar, for the very inspiring introduction on the AI, on the use on mill industry, automotive industry. So we have the next speaker, Julie Adams. So Julie Adams has been with Ieee SMC Society for quite many years. So we are very happy to have her here today to share with some of his views on AI. Well, Julie is the Associate Director of Research, Collaborative Robotics and Intelligent System Institute. And she is also a professor of computer science, robotics, artificial intelligence, industrial engineering, and mechanical engineering from Oregon State University.
Why is it not going? Is it working? It was going. You want me to just introduce myself?
Okay. No? What happened?
I don't know, because we're going to need to switch back over.
Pass it to them. Okay. Well, I think I will pass the floor to Julie. So she will probably introduce the talk about her and her research. Go. Thank you, Julie.
Can you switch it over to the other feed, please, to the H? No, to this computer here. Thank you. So thank you, Sam. And as Sam mentioned, I have been associated with systems managed cybernetics for a very long time. My very first publication as a graduate student was at this conference in San Antonio in 1993. And in 1995 in Vancouver, I got involved and basically started the best student paper competition because I was upset with the way the original one was handled. And Don Brown, one of the former presidents, asked me to become involved, as did Jim Tien. And so I started working on that. I've been involved with society generally ever since. And as far as my research is concerned, when I left academia, I went to industry and I spent 5 years working for Honeywell, Eastman Kodak. Yeah, that was it. I was trying to remember. I thought there was another company in there. For Honeywell and Eastman Kodak, looking at developing artificial intelligence and human systems for various complex systems, aviation-based or chemical-based. So the just prior Keynote hit a lot of key pieces of what I've done in my career. After that, I went back into academia, and after a couple of years at University of Rochester and Rochester Institute of Technology, I moved to Vanderbilt University, where I started the Human Machine Teaming Laboratory, which I then transitioned to Oregon State in 2017. So I want to pull on a couple of threads from Dimitar's talk. Dimitar, at the end of his talk, started alluding to the amount of data that has been collected over the years for autonomous driving. And I just looked up the statistics again. So just a couple of years ago, a single autonomous vehicle was generating 4 terabytes of data a day. There are 2.7 million vehicles, autonomous vehicles on the road collecting data. So the amount of data that we have is substantial and is really, I think, led to some of the capabilities we now have with large language models, although it's in a different type of data, than we've had in the past for artificial intelligence. At the same time, when I started my dissertation back in 1990, within robotics, the push was for fully autonomous robots. There was no interest in having a human in the loop. One of the reasons that my first paper was published in this conference was because the typical robotics conferences wouldn't accept my work because there was a human involved and the robots were not autonomous, fully autonomous. So, we're 35 years later almost, and we still don't have full autonomy of anything. And I think the question is, should we expect that these new AI models or AI methods are going to really generate that, and should we even want that? If you follow Missy Cummings from George Mason University et al. On LinkedIn, you will see that she's been highly critical of autonomous driving. And she's absolutely correct in a large number of her points, because we expect these systems to be perfect, but we as humans are not fully autonomous. So why would we expect robots or autonomous cars to be better than we are? There's lots of questions about that. And if we think about the amount of data that we've collected over the last, 15 years, whenever the DARPA challenge was, why are we still not there? Why are we still having all of these accidents? Why have we not solved the human in the loop issue? Every single one of these questions is central to this society. You've got the systems piece, you've got the human piece, and you've got the cybernetics AI piece. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about human-robot teaming because robots are where I spend a lot of my time. And Dimitar was talking about driving, which is a real world problem, and most of my research is in field robotics, where we are taking the systems out into the real world and we want them to do real things. When we do this, you have to have the ecological validity. And a lot of that is really dependent upon getting the data and whether or not you can actually process it with the techniques. So human-robot teaming has been my area of research for the last 35 years, other than the 5 years I was in industry, where I still had the human-machine teaming piece. That requires me to be knowledgeable of human factors and the human piece. It requires me to be knowledgeable of the cybernetics or the AI piece. And it requires me to be knowledgeable of the sensor processing, the sensor fusion, the hardware, actually developing hardware. It requires a lot of different skills than most people have. And so when we do this, what we want is we want to use the AI in order to enable that teaming. We are never going to achieve human embodied agent teams of any type, or even AI teams, if we don't understand how to create the underlying capabilities that help the human do their job and help that agent understand the human. However, in the human factors world, we hardly understand humans. We don't fully understand how workload occurs. We don't fully understand how to objectively assess situation awareness or vigilance or all of these other characteristics that are different amongst every single one of us, and even differ within us across days or within a day. So these are very hard problems for us to solve from a human factors perspective, and now we expect our artificial agents to be able to understand them and process them. So these are the things that we're attempting to achieve. Difficult problems, but I've never shied away from difficult problems. So what I want to do is I first want to start by asking you, what's the common denominator across these? And I was not alive when Shaky was developed, but the other two projects are projects that I have directly worked on. And the common denominator here is not that they're all robots, not that there's more robots, not that there's smaller robots, but another piece of it. The piece of it is there was AI in Shaky. It was narrow AI, but it was fundamentally AI, right? There's path planning, there's obstacle avoidance. In the multi-agents project that was part of my dissertation and sponsored by DARPA, same thing. I mean, yes, that is an overhead projector up there. That was a laser rangefinder in 1992. But, we were doing obstacle avoidance. We were doing path planning. These same capabilities were there. And then for the DARPA offset CCAS swarm, which is a project that completed in 2021, the objective was to take 250 autonomous vehicles or semi-autonomous vehicles and deploy them in an urban environment to do a 3-hour-long mission with multiple phases. These are simple robots. We're talking, quad rotors that fit in your hand. We are talking about, ground robots that were running Jetson processors, right? So while the processing has improved, ultimately, the consumption of that processing has also increased. But we were still doing navigation, path planning, and obstacle avoidance with these vehicles. So fundamentally, we've been very successful in this way of using narrow AI. And in many ways, for each of these systems, you would not have been able to do any of the current fundamental models that are discussed with large language models or generative AI on these systems. There simply was not the processing capability. As well, a lot of the current techniques really require on having cloud resources available. However, when you go into most field environments, you aren't going to have access to the cloud. If you're lucky, you'll have cellular coverage, so you could potentially get cloud access. But if you're trying to make a decision in real time, So the autonomous driving is a great example of something where you should have access to the cloud. If you're trying to make a decision in real time, you're probably not going to be fast enough to make a difference. When I talked to the FAA, as I did last week, about delivery drones and whether or not a human can get into the loop to actually interact with a drone when something happens, like motor failures that are basically going to cause the drone to drop out of the sky in the matter of moments, the FAA is like, well, how come the human can't get in the loop? And it's like, okay, well, do you recognize how quickly the vehicle falls from the sky, and what exactly is the human going to do? So we really have to think about, when we're talking about AI, where is it applicable, what can it do, and what should the human do? But we don't want to go back to the HABA-MABA, which is humans are best at and machines are best at models. Because what we end up with then are interesting AI techniques that the humans don't understand. And we end up giving the hardest things to the human because they can do the cognitive processing better than the AI in some circumstances. So we really need to think about this as a holistic system problem and not just the AI piece or the human piece. Now, earlier, I mentioned that when I started my research career as a graduate student, the typical robotics conferences, so ICRA and IROS, were not willing to accept any manuscript that required a human. I also mentioned that none of us are autonomous. We're all influenced by things in our environment, others in our environment, even our own biases. So why, again, would we expect any robot to be fully autonomous? It's unlikely, and there's a lot of circumstances where we do not want robots making autonomous decisions, that a human should have the ability to make a final decision, especially in a scenario where there's potential harm going to be caused to property or persons. So, what we see with each of these systems that I mentioned a moment ago is that they all had human inputs. Now, you can imagine how tedious it was to actually teletype to get Shaky to generate a plan. In some ways, that's not all that different than prompt management today. Now, we improved upon that with visual interfaces in the 90s, and we've gone so far as using virtual reality and handheld controllers to do interactions with swarms, but we still have a lot that we have to think about in that perspective. Now, when I talk about field robotics, one of my primary fields is disaster response. And you cannot have a robot that is going to, A, get in the way of what has to be done, or B, going to just sit around and look at the human. The robot has to be able to understand their human teammates as well as do its own tasks in order for the entire response team to be effective. So there's a number of scenarios in which robots have been developed and perhaps even tested, but like anything, if the humans are not going to find a benefit from that technology, they're not going to use it. And we know this from decades of product development and decades of humans interacting with systems. So in my group, we tend to look at how do we develop the algorithms that help us understand what's going on with the humans so that we can use that information for the robots to adapt. So one of the things that we have worked on for a very long time, now almost 15 years, is using physiological sensors that are wearable for unstructured environments, because disaster environments are not like this room where we can outfit it with cameras and other sensors that are embedded into the environment. We have to have wearable sensors. We also are talking about scenarios in which our users are out in that real world moving around, which means we cannot use EEG, nor can we use FNIRS because there's too much noise. And we have a high set of signal processing that has to be done, or traditionally called sensor fusion. But we also have to have interpretation of that data in order to give us objective analysis of what the human state is. So one of the pieces of our work has been this multidimensional workload estimation algorithm, in which we are trying to estimate the human's current workload And we're able to take some individual components of workload, not just cognitive workload, but in our case, visual, auditory, speech, gross motor, fine motor, and tactile, in order to come up with an overall assessment of workload. And we can classify that into an underload state, a normal load state, and an overload state. Most of the literature will talk to you about the overload and normal load states, but doesn't really talk about the underload state. And the underload state is just as critical. If we look at what is happening in these autonomous vehicle accidents that we hear about, we hear a lot about the fact that the human was out of the loop. The human wasn't able to respond in time. These are underload states, and they occur not just in autonomous vehicles. There's plenty of examples from aviation and other complex domains that have historically been represented in the society, in Systems Man Cybernetics Society, sorry. More recently, we have taken and developed the multidimensional task recognition algorithm. So what task is the human doing, and where are they in the process of doing that task? And we are currently developing the ability to predict into the future what that human performance state is going to be. The reason that we need to know these things is so that the robot can determine how it should interact with an individual and when it should interact with an individual. If you are doing CPR compressions, you have a high physical load, you have a high cognitive load, a high visual load, and a high speech workload because you're probably counting out loud. So you really don't have the capacity to take on any additional information coming from a robot. You may not even notice it. You might be able to hear a tone that perhaps indicates that there's an emergency and you need to get out of the area. But you're probably going to ignore it if you're a first responder doing CPR. So the robot has to be able to understand that in order to either defer the communication, identify someone else to communicate with, or in another circumstance, identify what communication modalities are available. Additionally, there is a need for the robot to understand how to redistribute tasks amongst the team members that have to be done, especially if there's a high priority task. So these are all pieces of trying to help the human do their job. Traditionally, we might call this decision support, but it's not effectively decision support in this context. But it is an important way of helping the human do their job. So I went to the IROS papers. They are currently available. IROS happens next week. And I looked for some papers related to large language models and generative AI. And I did this purposely. What we have noticed, not just at this conference or any of the traditional AI or machine learning conferences and robotics conferences, are that large language models and generative models are becoming very popular research topics. And in my opinion, many times, these technologies are being applied in domains or problems where they simply aren't the correct technology. There isn't enough data. You're talking about a sparse data regime, or you're talking about scenarios that simply need different types of data that can be handled by these techniques. Now, I just chose 5 papers. There are plenty more at IROS if you are so interested. And I basically chose them on a single day. There was no rhyme or reason to choosing these 5. I just wanted to use them as examples. And I think one of the things that's common that I see in these publications is that while people are applying these techniques, they're doing it because it is the sexy thing to do. It is the currently hot thing to do, right? And they are not looking at the ecologically valid problems that have to be done, right? How do you take these things out into the real world and have them be useful? In field robotics, you know, we are talking, and these are all projects that I've worked on, by the way, we are talking about pretty simplistic robots. If you look at the glider there in the bottom left, you know, simple processor, not even a Jetson, right? It is true, and I should actually reveal that Jensen Kwong is an alumni of OSU, and yes, I do know him. And he's done great things, I think, for AI, as well as other companies. But until we can miniaturize a lot of these technologies to get them into something as small as these vehicles, right, we aren't going to see the effects of using these kinds of technologies in field deployable robots. When you talk about an autonomous car, you know, you have a much larger body in which to put the technology. You can be assured, or mostly assured, because recently I was driving in places where you didn't have cell coverage, but you generally can be assured, at least in the United States, that most of the places an autonomous car is going to be driving, it will have cellular coverage and access to the cloud. I can tell you that in most of the places that I work, that's not the case. When we did the deployment in the Gulf of Mexico, which is what the marine robot pictures are from, you know, yeah, we had some Wi-Fi, yes, we had some cellular, but anytime you have a robot that goes under the ocean, you basically have no communications, right? So you're not going to be able to even access the cloud, and you're not going to have the processing battery capacity to be able to do some of these large language models, et cetera. When you talk about mountain search and rescue, so this picture in the middle at the top was taken by one of my students in February who was out doing a field exercise for mountain search and rescue, and he is a member of the Corvallis Mountain Search and Rescue team. He's up on a butte in the Cascade Mountains. There is no cellular coverage. You are dealing with very cold temperatures, so your battery power is not lasting as long, which means, are you really going to run some highly expensive computational processing on your vehicle? Probably not, because it's going to drain your battery too fast. So these are the realities of working in these environments. For the DARPA offset, you know, there you have to scale. So we were charged with, you know, basically creating 250 vehicles that could work as a swarm in this urban environment. Our most expensive vehicle was $3,500. And the majority of them were cheaper. So when you're talking about that kind of scale, again, you're limited, right? And so you have to think about what the capabilities are going to be. Now, having said that, I will say that for the Marine project and the DARPA offset, you know, within the same 12-hour period, I had ground robots, aerial robots, marine surface and marine underwater robots that were highly autonomous in real-world environments, and I'm probably the only person in the world who can say that. But this is all based on using the AI to achieve these tasks. So I think it's really important to think about, you know, how do you actually try to develop AI for these systems? So last week, OpenAI closed the largest VC funding round in history. Billions and billions of dollars. Great achievement, and we would think that that would be great for AI. At the same time, we've been seeing a lot of articles and a lot of calls talking about the fact that thus far, millions and billions of dollars have been thrown at AI, in particular referring to AI as large language models and generative AI, and yet we still don't have a lot that's highly useful. During the prior keynote, you know, there was a list of what people wanted from AI and what they were able to do with AI. And I talked to a number of people who are not technologists like us, and they, you know, will talk about how important it is to use something like ChatGPT to generate ideas or to help them start generating text for something. You know, and that can be useful, but how far can you take it? As a company that's trying to make money on AI tools, you have to have tools that people want to use. And I don't know that it's not in these headlines, but I read Business Week, and you know, just reading Business Week recently, there's discussion about the fact that Microsoft has not yet been able to make money on Copilot. So are we looking at a scenario where Copilot kind of goes the way of Clippy? It suddenly disappears. It's possible. We don't know. Now, I, for one, have been concerned for about the last year that we're headed for an AI winter. And at Amos in May, in New Zealand. There was a panel about the future of AI, and I stood up and asked the prominent people on that panel, so how do we, as a field who works in AI, help mitigate the reaction to what's happening with AI and potentially an AI winter? Because let's face it, when the AI winter happened in the 1980s, and honestly, I don't really remember it, but you know, we didn't have the level of media attention. We didn't have the average citizen talking about AI. And honestly, the average citizen doesn't recognize that they've been using AI for the last 15 to 20 years, ever since they got their smartphone. So, you know, how do we mitigate that as a field? And I think that's really important for us to talk about. And then just last week, there was this headline, which I felt validated about, because now it's not just me saying there's potentially an AI winter coming. I do very much fear that if we as individuals working in the field don't help to mitigate the response, and we just let the media or social media you know, dictate the response to the fact that we are developing these tools, but these tools are not quite as effective as we expect them to be, that there will be very broad impacts for decades to come. So what is the future? General AI, as Dimitar alluded to, has not been attained. Large language models and generative AI, you know, for 2 to 3 years now, I've been hearing, oh, these are going to solve all of our problems in AI. And at OSU, when I first went there, and we now have about 35 AI faculty, but when I first went there, I was the only one who was not a machine learning faculty member. And so when I would say that, they would all tell me I was crazy, that these tools were going to solve everything. But they're not. They're not the silver bullet. They're statistical models, right? They're enabling interesting tools, but they are not emulating human cognition. And in fact, I just saw another article on the flights here in either IEEE Spectrum or ACM Communications about how do we develop tests that are actually truly tests of whether or not the AI has cognition. So these are important pieces. I think traditional AI or narrow AI is still highly critical, especially in these field deployed environments. But that we are really moving towards, I think, something that is a hybrid, where you have a mix of these traditional narrow methods with something that is more generative. And you have to find the right domains, and you have to find the right applications for those things. Earlier in the keynote, there was discussion about the stock market and developing, you know, different types of funds. Those are places where there's a lot of data that potentially can mix these tools and come up with really nice solutions, whereas I think in field robotics, it's much harder to do that. And then, you know, I think we still want to be able to democratize robotics and make robots useful and usable. But in order to do that, we have to have the underlying AI and the underlying autonomy. And that means that we have to have the ecological validity, which is often overlooked by many in AI. And you know, there's also this concept that human-AI interaction is new. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not. I think that Norbert Wiener, sorry, I wanted to say Norman. Norbert Wiener, you know, the founder of cybernetics, would argue that humans have been interacting with AI for decades. And so I think that just continues as we move forward. And that's it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Hello. Okay, thank you, Julie. Thank you very much for the talk from Dimitar and Julie. Here we come to the second part of the forum. So we are going to talk or chat about the AI things. So for the audience, you're free to come to the microphone and to ask questions. So probably, again, I think the the way we have today is very good. We have a Dimitar from the industry, and Julie is more or less from academia. So I think we have heard about AI in robotic domain as well in automotive domain. So one of the thing, the first question I will ask both of you might be, so how the AI you see in the next decade, I would say 10 years, how the AI will influence the industry in the future. I would like to look at it in a short term, say 10 years. So Julie, you want to go first or Dimitar?
Is this on? Okay. I was looking for a button, and there was no button.
Okay.
So I think that, you know, obviously there's been a lot of money around the world poured into startups in artificial intelligence and even larger companies. And I think similar to autonomous driving, where we're seeing large companies pulling back from their investments because they've been unable to attain the outcomes that they desire, that we're starting to see the cracks in industry for these technologies, for large language models, generative AI. So I believe in 10 years, I think we will continue to have computational gains, but I do think that we will be seeing things that are more of a hybrid combination of applying the narrow AI techniques along the side of the generative AI tools into more complex AI systems to create new capabilities.
Okay, great. Dimitar?
Well, I have a similar opinion. I think that AI will continue to progress, not to the extent to which some people predict that it will be in a couple of years, general AI. I don't think that it will happen so soon. But I would expect that AI will progress in the future, and we will see progress in autonomous vehicles, but not to the extent to level 5 autonomy, where the vehicle is completely like eliminating the driver. That's right, what Julie said, that automotive companies now redirected investments now into so-called partial AI, partial autonomy. The partial autonomy is basically autonomy that allows you to automate tasks that are relatively simple, like keeping the lane with, keeping the vehicle within the same lane, and eventually to move, to change lane on highway, but that's it, not to do driving in the urban environment. So this is an indication that that the progress will be much more slower. I think that AI and autonomous vehicles are very highly correlated, actually. So I cannot make prediction for the AI to happen, for the autonomous vehicle to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. And one of the reasons for that is that we don't have general AI. To replace the person that driving the vehicle, you need to have a reasoning mechanism that is quite better actually than the human, which means that we have to achieve general AI, and we are very far from there.
I 100% agree that we are very far away from general AI. Yeah. I would also say, you know, adding on to what Dimitar said, you know, we're seeing around the world steps being taken to regulate AI, and I would argue that the European Union is pretty far out ahead, especially compared to the United States, although we're starting to make progress in the US. And I think the regulatory requirements are going to either help or hinder the development of these technologies. For example, and I can speak mostly to the United States on this topic, but if we look at the integration of drones into the national airspace, the FAA has been highly conservative because they're very concerned about safety, as they should be, with you know, aircraft that humans are on. But you know, the question is, are they overly regulated? So I think creating this balance of having sufficient safety guardrails on the technology, but also allowing for the technology to advance and continue to make improvements is going to be critical. And I don't think anyone knows how to do that effectively right now, especially as we move towards general AI.
Thank you very much. I think, yeah, this is, I think both of the speakers basically definitely don't have a crystal ball to so-called see through the AI in the next decade. Even in the next decade, I think it's very different than when we are a bit younger. When we write proposal, we are more or less able to see that particular area go in 10 years.
So I do think, though, that in 10 years, especially with regard to the type of research that I do, that we will have developed AI capabilities to allow software embodied agents to better understand the humans,
Right,
and to better interact with humans. And I think that's a critical piece, because we have to support the humans in what they do without taking necessarily jobs away. Hopefully we're modifying those jobs. But we also want to make sure that the humans can still control the technology for various reasons.
thank you.
I would expect that the AI methods in the future will move more towards knowledge-based type of approaches that would allow basically to infuse common sense and human knowledge into the algorithms. Current deep learning algorithms do not allow to have generative AI, even more than that, do not allow basically to add knowledge. To add knowledge, you have to do all kinds of tricks with putting rules and so on. All this is not in the current AI. And I see it in the future having more type of humanized type of AI in the future. And I believe that this is an opportunity for the society to contribute to that.
Yeah, thank you. Any question from the floor? Want to join? Eddie? Okay, Eddie is coming.
No, I think the person standing in the back was standing there first.
Oh, okay. Tadahiko.
I
Okay,
can't see.
okay,
Sorry.
Tadahiko. Oh, you can go first.
So thank you very much for your interesting talk, both of you. I think the common thing of your talks are human factors in order to improve AI. How do you think? What do you think about how we can incorporate human factors to develop AIs? And sometimes we want to incorporate the knowledge of social scientists. So, but you may know it is some challenge to collaborate with social scientists. So do you have any idea to collaborate with social scientists in order to incorporate their knowledge into developing AIs?
So that was my job in industry. I worked in human factors, even though I'm an engineer. And it was very interesting at Kodak when I got onto a project and the software engineers didn't realize that I was a computer scientist by training. And they tried to tell me that they couldn't implement my user interface design, that Visual Studio couldn't support it. And so I went back and I said, oh, really, you can't do that. And the next day I showed up and I'm like, oh, here you go. Here's the code for that. And after a couple of rounds of that kind of thing, they realized I wasn't going to give them something that they didn't, that I knew that they couldn't do. Now, I'm highly unusual, right? I was the only there were two of us, human factors engineers at Eastman Kodak, that had a computer science background. So there is a lot of barriers because they speak a different language, and they look at the problems differently. I think the key thing is to have the social scientists, the psychologists, the industrial engineers involved from the beginning, from the requirement stage, and doing an iterative process, trying to embrace the methodologies that they use, which I can tell you are not, you know, we're engineers, we want to be optimal, right? We want things to go quickly. And the social scientists need a little more time. They've got to collect the qualitative data and then do some formative evaluations, right? But those formative evaluations are really critical for making sure that you know, hit the 80, what we call the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the problems are addressed before you get too far along in the process. I think another key aspect is not just bringing in the social scientist, but talking to the users and the subject matter experts, right? So in my case, where I work in disaster response, I've spent the last 20 years talking to, you know, everyone from the local firemen and the police to FEMA, right? The whole way up the chain. And it's very time consuming, but it also grounds the research and ensures that what I do is actually going to be applicable. So I think those are the two key pieces, and it's not necessarily easy. And sometimes even I forget some of the skills that I've learned. So for example, at one point I had a student working at NASA, and she was using the terminology that we use in the laboratory, not thinking about the fact that that terminology had different meaning to the scientists that she was working with. So, you know, these are things that we just have to be cognizant of and work hard to address.
My comment to the question of Tadahiko is that probably it will be easy to introduce engineering knowledge into the AI. Speaking about decision making in AI, I think that we go a lot by following the inertia. A few years ago, DeepMind reinvented reinforcement learning. And everybody jumped on that to do reinforcement learning and to solve every decision making, even in control, every problem we're trying to solve now with reinforcement learning. And we see that reinforcement learning has a lot of deficiencies when it is applied to stuff that is not like the game of Go, but when you apply it to a real object. But we don't look at the methods of reasoning and decision making that are much more acceptable to engineering knowledge, like game theory. Utility functions allow a very flexible way to introduce knowledge in the form of some much more sophisticated version of a rule, actually, because you know, utilities are to some kind of like a concentrated type of knowledge. So I'm more optimistic about adding engineering knowledge into the AI in the future.
Very good. Eddie?
Thank you both for sharing your thoughts on these things. I'm going to ask you to bear with me for a moment with my, I'm going to sort of ramble a little bit first before I get to my actual question. But I'll start out by saying that some of the key points that you both raised, they resonate so well with my thinking on these topics. And, you know, I've struggled over the last several years in trying to figure out how best to articulate these views. So that we actually do something a little bit different than what we're doing as a community. I think that artificial intelligence in its 8 million definitions that it has today has really gotten too artificial. And we've gotten away from the natural aspect of intelligence. Dimitar pointed at the so-called traditional AI techniques that we sort of came from and are now been blindsided by the current trends. I think we need to find a way to get back to those things that have been put on the dusty library shelves, because we were never really done with investigating those capabilities and bringing them, say, to the state where they can actually improve the systems of today. So I'm thinking that we need to have more focus on cognitive aspects, cognitive architectures, thinking machines, as opposed to what I might refer to as pattern processors. You know, a lot of what we're doing with generative AI, looking at data or text images, Whereas the systems we're interested in are not really doing a lot of things at an intelligence level with those elements of information. So we're really taking these small elements of information and we're doing processing on patterns. And we're not really dealing with intelligence and thought and thinking machines. So I think we were there in the past, we've gotten away from it because of the current trends, and we somehow need to find a way to return. So my question is, in sort of thinking about the society, SMC society, from a thought leader perspective, how can we steer the community back to knowledge-based and cognitive approaches, effectively natural intelligence, in the root of cybernetics? You know, so one of the most fundamental definitions of cybernetics is communication or control processes in the animal and the machine. The animal certainly is a natural thing. The machine, not so much. I think we've been so focused on the machine part with current trends in technology, and we've forgotten about the more natural piece, which is the animal. So how can we steer our community back to those things that you stressed in both your talks as things that are traditional yet still useful for both your fields? Thanks.
Thank you.
Eddie, this is it's a nice question. It's difficult to answer with a few words, but it is something that will make us to think about how we as researchers will find a way to some extent to go against the inertia and to show that there are other ways of doing of solving problems, and recall what was done 30 years ago and which was still good actually, and we completely forgot about that. Fuzzy logic, genetic algorithms and so on, we almost forgot about that now. So I think that this is up to us as researchers to show leadership and to demonstrate, to start demonstrating to the public and to the research community that we can do things differently.
I think, you know, this is a great question, Eddie, and I didn't think it was rambling at all because you saw my head shaking with almost every sentence. Yes, it was shaking. I am not someone who has embraced large language models or generative AI for my research because it cannot apply to what I do. Having said that, you know, there are a number of hurdles I and my students face, not only in our publications, but also in the grant funding spectrum, which as an academic, which most of us are, we have to do, right? We have to have funding, we have to be able to graduate students, and our students have to be able to publish. And from the publishing perspective, what I have seen happening in the last 3 years that I find highly troublesome is that there is a propensity for reviewers to only look at the last 5 years of research and ignore anything beyond that period. And therefore, you end up getting reviews that claim you aren't doing anything useful, you're not making a contribution because you're not using the latest tools. And there's a failure to understand that those tools aren't, you know, just the shiny new object that they are, but they're not applicable in all scenarios, in all data sets. In fact, I even had that, one of my students was giving a presentation on his dissertation last June, and someone who is very knowledgeable of AI said, well, why can't you just use generative AI? You know, and you know, didn't quite understand that if you did that, you weren't going to get anything useful because you'd have overfit, undersampled results, which was astounding given that they teach a lot of machine learning. So I think that as a society, what can we do? I think it becomes important for us to set a standard that and I don't exactly know how to do this, and I'm thinking I've got my associate, you know, senior associate editor hat on for THMS, to somehow ensure that the conference and the journals are not giving in to this very limited perspective of we only go back 5 or 6 years. And if it doesn't, looking at what the reviewers are saying and taking steps to try to make those corrective actions, because that is the way I think we as a society put out there what is important, right? Because where are we seen the most? It's through the papers in the conference. It's through the papers in our journals. And if we aren't representing that, then what is our purpose?
I would add to this that I think that we have some power as a society. We have several journals that are published by our societies. Our editors of those journals can establish a standard actually that will try to move into a more realistic type of AI approaches. And I believe one of the tools can be editorials, can be special issues and so on that would help navigate a little bit faster towards what we were talking about. So I'm not completely pessimistic about this. I think that there are ways, and perhaps this should be one of the topics that we discuss at the board meetings, Eddie, rather than the usual topics that we discuss for 10 hours a day. I think that this is a very conversation that should go between the leadership of society and editors of the journals, and this is the way that we can influence them.
And I think on top of that, I have not, in all transparency, not been on the BOG for a number of years now. I'm happy or sad to hear that the meeting topics have not changed all that much. But I think, there's, in some circumstances, especially with the journals, I think that there is some top-down pressure from IEEE with regard to how we handle reviews, and that we don't just desk reject lots and lots of papers or those kinds of things. And I think we have to come up with the appropriate balance that gives the editors the flexibility to say, look, this paper is not up to our standards, and try to provide feedback to the authors about why these papers should be immediately rejected and not sent out. Because, let's face it, I can tell you in the last, what has it been, 3 weeks since I came back from sabbatical, I think I have literally had 100 requests for reviews. I can't do that. My students can't do that, right? So there's an exceptionally large number of requests, and so then you end up going lower and lower in the student pools to less experienced students who are probably pulling out this 5-year rule because they all only use Google. Google Scholar. So I think, there's this tension that has to be addressed, and I'm not sure how we do that and stay within the good graces of IEEE's publication organization.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think Dimitar always a good point that, what Eddie just mentioned about I wouldn't say problem, it's some observations, suggestions that probably could be, the SMC board. I think recently, agents do set up a number of committees to look into all these things. So probably the future directions of the society definitely is one of the very crucial direction that we might need a committee to look into it. Regarding the implementation, what Julie just mentioned, I think this society do have a good portal to implement these things, right? Because nowadays I think no matter research students' fundings or anything, I would say 80 to 90% is about AI. If you want to get funded, you must put AI there. Nowadays, I would say 90% are on LLM, no matter what, and then they get funded. So similarly, probably what Dimitar mentioned is transaction doing the same thing. 80% to 90% are deep learning things. So I think, well, D&I, diversity and inclusion, so probably could also be addressed in the board meeting or the I would say that the leadership of the society probably, might take some time to look into this. Okay, so I will move.
Before we go on ahead.
Go ahead.
So Eddie, you asked about some other things that the society could do, and I'm going to go back about 30 years and put on my student hat. You know, I think about 15 years ago, and I know Dimitar and Eddie, you were around then, we were doing some activities where we were creating like not workshops, but like tools for students on various topics. I don't remember exactly what we called them, but you could imagine that we could do some meetings at this meeting, you know, sub-meetings at this meeting, tutorials, or even online tutorials for students or young researchers about how to properly go about navigating all this literature. You know, I'm younger than I think both of you, but I still remember having to go to the library. I'm definitely younger than him. I think I'm younger than Eddie. But I still remember having to go to the library as a grad student to look through the books, the compendium books that listed all the papers published by the journals. And within this society, there were only 3 journals back then in the magazine, right? I don't know how many we have now. Robotics and automation had 1, right? So the proliferation of journals, not only within IEEE, but across the spectrum of publishing, and not even talking about all the conferences, makes it almost impossible. I'd hate to be a student today and have to try to figure out what venues and what papers I should be looking at. And just thinking about doing a literature review for my dissertation, right? It looks like an impossible mountain to overcome. So I think if we could come up with some tutorials or webinars or something to kind of reach out to the younger research crowd that's trying to address these issues about, you know, first of all, what are large language models and generative AI, and in what circumstances should they be used or not used? But also, how do you overcome some of these pulls, right? I mean, this is no different than things we've seen in the history of research, right? There's hot topics that come along and you're constantly pulled in those topics or in those directions, right? So how do you navigate that and kind of set your own direction that can still have a contribution, I think would be some interesting things to consider as a society.
Thank you. Anyone want to raise question at this moment? You're free to do so. Okay, please. Li Peng, yeah, please.
Thank you, Dimitar and Julia, for very interesting presentation and thoughts. So I think this question for both of you, but referring to the AO5 autonomy, I think Dimitar talked about. So my question is that really achievable?
I'll let him answer first.
My answer is if general AI can be achieved, then level 5 is achievable, 100%. So I would use as a metric actually the status of AV, autonomous vehicle, as a measure how good current AI is. Current AV vehicles are in the range of level 2, level 3. I believe that probably AI is on the same, like on a similar scale, somewhere in the middle too.
Because, Julia, what's your...
So I generally agree. I think that, you know, I was recently in Delhi for the first time. And I jokingly said to the IIT folks that I was visiting that if you could solve autonomous driving in Delhi, I think you would solve it for everywhere in the world because it's the most chaotic driving I've ever seen in my life. But I agree that I don't see general AI or level 5 autonomy probably at least for 20 years. Definitely more than 10.
But in a sense, my thinking is this way, is that the foundation is replacing the human being. But our human beings are not perfect drivers. We make a lot of mistakes. So if we're fully replacing the human beings, we still will have a lot of accidents. So in a sense, when we achieve that state of, so put another way, so when we can say self-driving is successful, so what's the criteria will be?
I think in my opinion, it is successful today.
Yeah, that's also saying,
At least in the environments that it does well, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you have been to San Francisco lately, but before I went to Delhi, I had to go to San Francisco to get my visa. That's a whole different story. But walking around San Francisco and seeing the Waymo cars. So the first one I saw had someone in the front seat, in the driver's seat. And I was like, oh, okay, this is normal. The second one I saw had someone sitting in the back seat, nobody in the front seat, and I'm like, oh, that's a little weird. And then the next one I saw had no one in it, and honestly, that freaked me out. But I do think that Waymo has been exceptionally successful in San Francisco, although there's lots and lots of stories about it not going well. You know, but when I look at it, it's very successful. Now, is that same technology going to be successful driving around the Cascade Mountains in a snowstorm? Absolutely not, right? So I think it's a measure of what do we consider to be success. You know, when the DARPA Grand Challenge was held, there was, you know, nobody who won the first competition. They all crashed almost immediately, right? So we've come a long way. So I don't think that we should be discounting that.
I agree. Waymo is really the most successful company now regarding autonomous vehicle. The problem that Waymo has is that this model they have, the current operation of Waymo is not sustainable at all because the company is losing huge amount of money on every vehicle because of the cost of the sensors, the cost of hardware, software, and so on. In addition to that, they maintain multiple multiple people to monitor this remotely. So because this is remote, then they need to have depots to maintain those cars. So the cost for maintaining this operation is huge. I want to tell you that we had similar operation at Ford, a company called Argo, which was to big extent close to the success of Waymo. And the company closed it because it was not sustainable. It was huge amount of money going to this company and without any business case, because can you replace, what is the value of replacing one taxi driver, for instance? I think that the success will come in probably very soon in Texas, where the Aurora operates. Aurora is a small company that was it's a spin-off of Uber and Waymo, actually, and they automate heavy trucks. Automating heavy trucks only on a section of a highway between cities and having people to take the vehicles into the city. I think that this is very realistic model compared to the cost of heavy truck versus a cab. Makes business sense. So I think that this will be the first major success.
And I want to thank.
By the way, I personally invested money in this company. Because I'm a believer in that this might be successful.
Yeah. So I actually was going to mention the human factors aspect, and I totally forgot. But thank you, Dimitar, for bringing that up. This has been a problem in robotics in general, right? If we go back and we look at deploying robots for disaster response, it's typically 3 or 4 people to deploy one robot. And that's been, exactly what Dimitar is talking about has been an issue. Now, as part of the DARPA offset program, we had an hour to set up 200 robots before deployment. And we had about 25 people. We joked on the team that I was the most overpriced, highly paid battery charger in the world, because I literally would just sit at the battery table, changing batteries out to get them charged. So it does take a lot of people. And this goes back to my point of ecological validity in the business case. And if you can't make money on it, then why pursue it? And if until we can get to levels of autonomy and AI that are really useful in that way, it's going to be costly. And that's why, even before the latest investments into AI, there was a lot of investment over the last decade for robotics. And when I made the decision to leave Vanderbilt and move to OSU, it was intentional, because I felt like we were on the cusp of really seeing robots out in the world. And we still aren't really seeing that yet. And a lot of these companies went belly up. Why? Because they didn't really understand their users. They didn't really have a good business case. And we're seeing very similar things with AI startups right now, exceptionally similar things. And I've talked to a few people who are involved with VC funding of AI startups, and it's amazing how many quote unquote startup ideas they see that are basically leveraging somebody else's tool, right? So I've got this new product that leverages, Llama or the latest version of ChatGPT, right? And so they're very dependent. And so, there's not a lot of novelty there, and there's not a lot of business case. And I think that's a big factor.
Thank you, both. Yeah.
Thank you, Nathan. Okay, thank you. Anyone want to come? Can you come to the microphone? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dimitar. Thank you, Julie. My name is Haibin Zhu. And I noticed that because the topic is on AI, so I mentioned with SMC, XCOM and board members to talk about, if we need to go up on the train, but prepare for jump out when it's crashed. So, but now the problem is, especially for you mentioned the generative AI, because there is a big problem, I believe, is how to verify the decision-making suggestion from the AI tools. Okay, that's, I think it's a challenge. If you have any comments for such kind of verification, like for example, if you ask ChatGPT a question for some answer, the answers sometimes is stupid answer or totally wrong, but it confirmed. How we can use some extra way to verify, that's I believe it's an extra challenge for us right now. What's your opinions? Thank you.
It definitely is a problem. As many of you probably know, we have a very interesting election going on in the United States this year. And there's a lot of these deep fakes, if you will, being coming up in various places. And how do you verify it? And a lot of people who don't, people I think like us, can look at that and we can look at aspects of the images and say, this isn't really a real image, especially someone like me who worked at Kodak and paid attention to images. But how do we actually get the technology to verify and validate that? And I think that is an exceptionally difficult problem. There's a large number of people working on these problems, especially in areas like cyber-physical systems, that aren't, a lot of these people aren't, I think, core to systems managed cybernetics. And I think if we're trying to talk about how do we bring that to members of this society and attendees of this conference, you know, maybe we need to start branching out a little bit and talking more to the controls folks and talking more to the cyber-physical systems folks. But I still think it's a very hard problem. We have a number of faculty at OSU specifically focused on that problem. And it's not just the explainability problem of how do you help someone understand, because I would argue you've got to understand what level they need to know, right? If you think about an ATM, how many of you know all the nitty-gritty details of how an ATM works when you take money out? And do you need to know that in order to trust it and use it? So, you know, it's a question of what are the different levels that you have to go to, and what are the levels of verification and validation that you need?
I think we have seen in the recent couple of months some progress in the large language model, specifically the GPT 4.0, where they use people in the loop, users who try to modify their prompts, and they use also output from a reinforcement learning algorithm. And I have been critical for reinforcement learning regarding autonomous vehicle, but I think that reinforcement learning makes big sense to use for active learning, specifically for a large language model, because in this case, RL operates on the object that makes decision. It does not operate on a simulation model, and the likelihood to get a good answer and to optimize really is much more higher. So I believe that in the future we will see this type of improvements where we have people in the loop. So basically, the large language models are corrected corrected by people, and with the help of course, of optimization algorithms.
Oh yes, that's why in my class I teach my students, especially my students is worrying about their jobs after computer science graduates. So I told them, okay, I encourage you to use ChatGPT to make programs, okay, C++, Java, or Python, but they are required to know what exactly it meets the requirements or why you design this way. So not just copy and paste and use it. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I think we need to tell the students how to use the AI tools, not controlled by the AI tools, right? Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's a critical thing. And there, actually in the ACM communications recently, there were a number of articles in exactly what you're talking about of how do we ensure that we don't have the skill degradation, but also enable students to have the jobs of the future that will exist. And it's a combination of the two, that you're not just cutting and pasting, but you have to actually understand the fundamentals and in order to be able to know if the technology is giving you a correct answer.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the time is almost up. So before I wrap up the forum today, so I think today we still have too many topics that we haven't covered within such a short time. But I think I myself have learned a lot from Julie and Dimitar. I think at least we have identified numbers of issues or architectures or concerns on the AI things. So one thing they mentioned about the human in the loop, that is especially for autonomous system. So how that being worked in the future from the developer point of view, should that be incorporated into the system design specifications? And from what just Professor Chu mentioned about how do we validate? Well, in software engineering, we have a very rigorous cycle, right? When you come up with solution, then I could validate it. But obviously, nowadays we have the so-called end-to-end. Everything is end-to-end, so something is missing in between. So from the developer point of view, how are we going to verify what's happening in between. So those are the very challenging things. And especially nowadays, we are encouraged. I think that the biggest topic is on LLM. So that is even difficult to really verify, or also from the development point of view, from the academia point of view, not every one of us could afford developing solutions from LLM. So that is also some of the concern. But anyway, I would like to give a final chance to the two panelists to finish, to conclude the panel. So Julie, you start first.
I'm laughing at your comments a little bit because I am taking back to my undergraduate, probably my first computer science class, where it couldn't have been the first one, it was probably the second one, where the professor said garbage in, garbage out, right? And we've probably all heard that as computer scientists. And I think that's true even more so now, when you are trying to use these new techniques and you are taking in large amounts of information, you don't really know what that information is, you are by default potentially including garbage. And so how do we do garbage collection in a slightly different way on our data than we would on our Java programs or whatever language is using garbage collection, to clean up the data and allow for our models to provide better results, which, this just popped into my head when you said that. So completely, not completely off topic, but I think we've got a lot of hard challenges going forward. But I do feel, as Sam said at the beginning of this session, that this society is specifically positioned to be able to address these hard questions. We are the only society in IEEE that looks at the system pieces, that looks at the cybernetics and artificial intelligence pieces, and looks at the human pieces all in synchrony. You could argue that robotics has AI in it. Yes, it does. You could argue that computational intelligence has AI in it, and yes, it does. But it doesn't have these other pieces. And if we want to be able to have systems that are going to go out in the real world and provide useful capabilities, then you have to look at the holistic problem. And this is the only society that does that.
Thank you. Julie, Dimitar?
Well, I think that the discussion today, plus the questions that we received, I think that all this was very, very useful. And I would suggest to think collectively, all of us who are in this room, what can we do to propagate these ideas and to infuse them in the body of our society?
Definitely.
Because this is, doesn't make big sense just to forget about that tomorrow. If we can somehow come up with some ideas about this, how to publicize this, yes. I think that it will be very, very beneficial for our society, for members.
And I would argue that it's not just to the members of our society, but also to the IEEE establishment, right? You have to educate the IEEE establishment just as much. And I know that that will lead to a whole number of controversies within the Technical Activities Board, but I do think that it is something that is important.
Okay, I have to thank you, the two panelists, and well, we have a number of VPs here, so it would be nice that to really have a good memory of what we have discussed here, and hope that we could bring those questions and possible that the SMC society could play an important role to really face the new challenges of the society. So I, again, thank you very much for the two speakers. Let's give us a round of applause. Thank you, thank you.